Okay, now we're going to study the for each next loop, which is slightly different than before. Before we were studying the for next loop. Now we're throwing in this word also. That's one of the keywords. So this is the for each next loop. So let's see what that is. Now before we go on, he talks about something called an array, and we don't study arrays until next week. So you don't really know what they are, but basically an array is just a simple thing. It's just a list of stuff. So it's just a list. Okay, so it can be a list of any kind of thing basically, but it's a list. So it could be a list of numbers, it could be a list of words, it could be a list of files or file names, it could be a list of whatever, but it's just a list of stuff. So that's what we mean by an array. Okay, so we're going to be what we're going to do is we're going to be given an array, and we're going to loop through each item in the array. So we're going to take the first item and do something with it. Then we're going to take the next item and do the same kind of thing with the second item in the array. And then we're going to take the next item and do the same kind of thing with that, and so on. So we're going to loop. We say we're going to loop through the array or loop through the list. And that is when we use the for each next loop, because it's for each element in the array, do something. Okay, for each element in the array, like for each word in the array, do something, like make it capital letters, or for each number in the array, if suppose we have an array of numbers or a list of numbers, for each number in the array, do something like multiply by 5. Or for each, suppose we have files. The array consists of different files in a folder. So for each file in the array, maybe open it or close it or rename it or whatever. So we want to do something to each element in a list or in an array. So in that case, we don't use the for next loop, which is what we just studied. We use the for each next loop. Okay, so that's what we're studying now. So the author here says actually that usually in practical day-to-day work for when you're writing programs, you actually don't use the for next loop very often, the one that we just studied. It's not used that often. This one is used much more frequently. Okay? Because the way the .NET framework typically works, you'll usually use a derivative of the for next loop, and that derivative is the for each next loop, called the for each next loop. In the algorithms you design, so in the programs that you make, whenever a loop is necessary, you'll usually have, he should say usually, not you'll always have, you'll usually have a collection of things to work through. Like we said, a collection of files from a directory, or a collection of words, or a collection of numbers, or whatever. And this collection is usually expressed as an array, or it's what we usually put it into what we call an array. For example, you might want to look through all the files in a folder, looking for those that are larger than a particular size. So you might say, for each file in the folder, and then you might have something like, is the size of the folder greater than 1 megabyte, or something like that. Okay, so you're looking through the set of files, so and that set of files is probably in an array, or the file names are probably in an array, so you can search through or loop through that array. So he says again, for example, you might want to look through all the files in a folder, looking for those that are larger than a particular size. When you ask the .NET framework for a list of files, you are returned an array of strings. So that's why I said it doesn't actually give you the files. It just gives you the names of the files, and those names are put into an array or a list. And that's obviously a list of strings because it's a list of the file names, with each string in that array describing a single file. So we're going to get all the files in a directory, or in a folder. We're going to get all the files, and it's going to give it to us as an array of the file names, and then we're going to loop through that array and write each of the files into our list box. Okay, so this is kind of useful, and you might like this this part of the program. Okay, so we're going to go back to the same form that we had before, and you're going to add this. So first of all, add a new button for each loop, btn for each loop, and give the text property of the button for each loop. Okay, and then you're going to put this code in. Let's just a moment. So we're going to put this code in. So again, we're going to clear the list. You saw what happens when you comment out this this part of the code, this line. Okay, for each we didn't. Oh, oops. Okay, sorry. In this one, we don't need to predefine the word string folder. Okay, we could have put dim string folder as string, but we're allowed to actually do that part within the for each next loop. Okay, so how does it work? We say for each, and then we define a new variable. We say string folder as string. So we're doing it in the for each loop. Okay, in the first line of the for each loop. And then we say, now this is going to be used as a representative of whatever we say in. So this is going to be the array. So the array is going to be what? Let's read this line. my.computer.filesystem.getDirectories C. So that's our C drive, and we're going to get all the directories there. Okay, so when we do this, what gets returned to us, or what gets created, is an array of the names of all of the, I think it's the directories in here, maybe not the files. So all the directories in there. Okay? So, and this variable, as we go through that array, this is going to stand for each of the elements in the array, each of the elements in the list, each of the directories that we get is going to this is going to stand for it or represent it. So this will stand for the first one that we get, and then what do? We add it to our list box. So that will put in the name of the first directory, and then this will go and look at the second element in our array, and it will take on that value. And so when we add it to the list box, we'll be adding the next directory's name to our list box, and so on. I hope this is clear. He says, run the project and click the for each loop button. You should see a list of folders that are in the root of your C drive, in other words, in the first level of your C drive. Now I'm not sure, maybe we'll have trouble on our school computers doing this. I'm not sure if we have the permission to write the names of these directories. So if that doesn't work, I haven't tried it at school, if that doesn't work, you could try a directory that you have more control over, which would be something like users and your name in here. So you'd have to go to your name in the directory system, and then if this doesn't work, if the C/ doesn't work, then you might have to do that. Or you could just try it anyway. You could try a different directory, maybe a directory that you have more control over, just to see what happens. So you could put a different file path here. Okay, so let's read how he explains how the code works. So the for each loop example, in that example, we use the my namespace that's here. He says the my namespace in the .NET framework exposes several classes that make it easy to find the information that you'll use on a daily basis. So this my namespace is sort of powerful. That means my namespace just means it lets you access a lot of sort of powerful functions. Okay? And when they say exposes several classes, that means makes available to you several classes. So when you use this my dot something, there's a lot of stuff you can get at or that you can use there. Okay, in particular, the computer class. So we haven't really talked about classes, but in the kind of programming we're doing, which is called object-oriented programming, we have classes and then what we call subclasses and subclasses of those and so on. And those are just like functions. Well, in our case, right now, it's kind of like saying we have functions and then kind of other functions that are sort of underneath those functions and other functions that's not very clear. But anyway, it basically just gives us a way of accessing these functions. We'll learn more about object-oriented programming later. So in particular, the computer class provides several other classes related to the computer on which your program is running. Since you want to find out about files and folders, use the file system class. So remember, these are just like libraries of functions for our purposes, which provides methods and properties. So methods, we're only talking about methods right now, but also properties for working with files and folders. The get directories method, so this is a method, right? How do I know that get directories is a method? Because it's got the brackets and the brackets, right? So the get directories method, so that's we can use this method by writing a kind of path to this method like this. Returns a collection of strings. Again, we didn't talk about what's meant by a collection either. Representing names of directories or folders on your computer. So we've been calling it an array. It can also be called a collection. They're not the same thing, but it can also be called a collection. In this case, you use it to return a collection of folder names in the root of the computer's C drive. Okay, so the getDirectories method returns a collection of strings representing names of directories or folders on your computer. In this case, you use it to return a collection of folder names in the root of the computer's C drive. The concept with the for each next loop is that for each iteration, you'll be given the thing that you're supposed to be working with. So you'll be given one of the directories. You need to provide a source of things. That is, you need to get a collection of directories, or you need to give it a list of words or a list of numbers. You need to provide the list or the source of the things. In this case, a collection of strings representing folder names. So you have to give it the list, of course. It doesn't know which list you want otherwise. And you provide a control variable. So our control variable is this one, right? That's our control variable, string folder, str folder, into which the current thing can be put. So this str folder will hold each of the elements in our list, each of the elements in our array as we go through the loop. So the first time through the loop, this will contain the first element in our array. The second time we go through the list, this will contain the second element in our array. The third time we go through the list, this will contain the third element in our array. So you need to give it this control variable into which the current thing can be put. So it will store the current item. The getDirectory, so now he's talking about the getDirectories method, provides the collection in this case, and the inline variable string folder. So this he calls an inline variable because we're declaring it inline, right? We didn't do a separate dim statement up at the top. We're declaring it inline. So he calls it an inline variable. Okay? The getDirectories method here provides the collection. So that gives us the collection, that gives us the array. And the inline variable provides the control variable. Okay, so that becomes the control variable. And we have to have both of these in our for each next loop. So a little bit more explanation. He says this means that on the first iteration, our control variable string folder is equal to the first item in the string collection. In this case, there's a folder called recycle bin. So it's equal to that. You then add that item to the list box by doing this. And then go to the next iteration. As with normal for next loops, not for each next, but as with normal for next loops, for every iteration of the loop, you're given a string containing a folder name, and you add that string to our list in the list box. When there are no more folders to be returned, execution automatically drops out of the loop. So it goes outside of the next statement, goes to the line after the next statement. They call that dropping out of the loop. Okay? The loop doesn't have control of the program anymore. Okay, so what is this called again? It's called a for each loop. What kind of loop did we do before that? We could call it just a for loop, or we could call it a for next loop, and we could also call the one we're doing now a for each next loop. But you can just call it a for loop or a for each loop. Okay, so now the first thing we covered was the for loop, and now we've covered the for each loop. And the difference is that the for loop just loops through a numerical index, but the for each loop loops through a collection or an array or just a list of items. Okay.